There are prisons people escape from, and then there's Parkhurst. It was called the British Alcatraz and the end of the line. 20-foot fences, a 24-foot sheer wall, and Britain's most violent criminals inside. In its living history, no one had ever escaped from Parkhurst. It was considered impossible. Until one evening, 3 men did just that. Using a homemade key and a ladder built from scrap metal. And the most insane part? Hours after their escape, in the dark of a cold January evening, a taxi drove along a quiet road on the Isle of Wight. Inside, the driver made casual conversation with those 3 men in the back seat, asking if they were visiting family. One of the passengers, a young man with intense eyes, smiled and said they were just heading down to Sandown for a little getaway. The taxi driver thought nothing of it. When he dropped them off and watched the trio dissolve into the night, he had no idea that he had just given a ride to the most wanted men in the country. To understand the story, you have to know Parkhurst's reputation. Parkhurst was a Category A facility, the highest security level in the UK, often called the end of the line. And that was no exaggeration. No hope for appeal, no chance for freedom, just decades of a monotonous, brutal routine surrounded by the most dangerous men in the country. When your entire future has been taken away, the only thing left is to risk all of it for one single chance, even if it seems impossible. It housed about 200 of the country's most violent, disruptive inmates under intense watch. Prisoners there included murderers and terror offenders, guarded under one of the strictest regimes in the country. Its Victorian-era compound had 20-foot fences topped with razor wire and a 24-foot concrete perimeter wall designed to be unclimbable. Nobody had escaped from Parkhurst in living memory. Yet in January 1995, 3 prisoners did the impossible. Who were these men bold enough to challenge Britain's Alcatraz? The youngest was Matthew Williams, a highly intelligent but dangerous man in his early 30s. Williams was serving multiple life sentences for trying to bomb people and even attempting to poison his own mother. He was such a misanthrope that guards nicknamed him Psycho. He had even tried to escape once before by threatening guards with a hidden needle. Clever, manipulative, and with nothing to lose, Williams became the mastermind of the escape plot. The second man was Keith Rose, about 20 years older and outwardly very different. Rose had been a respectable businessman, a computer company director, until debts and desperation led him to crime. In 1990, he kidnapped a wealthy businessman's son at gunpoint and held him for ransom. After 5 days, police caught Rose and put him behind bars for life. Behind bars, Rose was polite and well-spoken, the model inmate who took education classes seriously. But behind the facade, he too was plotting freedom. Rose brought valuable skills to the table. He was mechanically savvy and even held a civilian's pilot license. If anyone could help engineer an escape from an island prison, it was him. The third was Andrew Rodger, a hardened career criminal in his 30s. Rodger was serving life for brutally killing a night watchman with a crowbar during a robbery gone wrong. He was known for extraordinary physical strength. Fellow inmates claimed he could bend iron bars with his bare hands. And he worked as a trusted orderly in the prison's metal workshop. Like the others, Rodger desperately wanted out of his cage. His muscle and access to tools made him an ideal accomplice. These 3 unlikely allies formed a secret pact to do what everyone said couldn't be done. Williams and Rose, who knew each other from a previous prison stint, pulled Rodger into their plan. In hushed whispers in the yard and workshop, the trio brainstormed one of the most audacious breakouts in UK history. Williams was obsessed with finding a weak link in Parkhurst's security. He studied guard routines, camera placement, and locks. He noticed the prison had recently color-coded many locks. Some had green tags, others red. Red locks seemed to be everywhere, including on the gates leading out. Williams realized that if they could get a key for those red locks, it would open most of the doors inside the prison. That was their golden ticket. Encouraged by Rose, Williams set out to make a copy of a red master key. He joined the prison's metalwork class to gain access to tools and materials. Conveniently, the music room door had a red tag lock, giving him a model to study whenever he could sneak a peek. By stealthily observing that lock and guards' keys, Williams began crafting an imitation key from scrap metal. It was delicate, dangerous work. He hid a small hacksaw blade in his cell and spent nights quietly filing down a piece of metal. After some trial and error, and one heart-stopping moment when a prototype key got stuck in a lock before he could pry it out, Williams succeeded in forging a working copy key. Now, they could unlock a path through the prison. Next, they had to overcome the final barrier: the perimeter fence and wall. The solution was obvious, but risky. They needed a ladder tall enough to get over. Rodger took the lead here. Using his position in the workshop, he secretly built a ladder in sections from scrap metal, hiding the pieces among legitimate projects. He quietly pieced together a sturdy ladder long enough to reach the top of the prison wall. By early January 1995, all the pieces were in place. Williams had the key, Rodger had the ladder, Rose kept track of routines and timing. They planned to slip away during evening exercise, use the key to navigate through locked doors to the workshop, grab the hidden ladder, cut through the inner fence, climb the wall, and vanish. It was straightforward on paper, but everything had to go right. January 3rd, 1995. The trio put their plan into action. That evening, during a gymnasium exercise period, they prepared to make their move. Adrenaline coursed through their veins as they mingled with other inmates under the watch of a few guards. As prisoners were being lined up to leave, a staged fistfight among inmates, bought off with a few packs of cigarettes, suddenly distracted the guards. In those seconds, Williams, Rose, and Rodger ducked out of sight and hid in a corner of the gym. The guards, not noticing the reduced head count, locked the gym for the night with the trio still inside. Breathless and excited, the three escapees waited for the area to clear. Then they got to work. Williams pulled out his precious handmade key and went to the first locked door leading out of the gym. Click. It opened. They crept through the quiet corridors, heading toward the maintenance yard and workshop. Using Williams' key, they quietly opened one locked door after another, moving toward the prison's maintenance yard. Only one heavy gate's lock gave them a scare when it wouldn't turn the first time. Williams jiggled his key, and finally, it clicked open. Soon they reached the workshop in the maintenance yard, their staging point for escape. The yard was dim and cold, lit only by a few floodlights. They had one close call when a guard with a dog passed nearby. The dog sensed something, but the guard moved on without noticing them. They slipped into the workshop. Rodger retrieved the ladder pieces, and in minutes, they had it assembled. They also grabbed wire cutters and an electrical cord to use as rope. They carried the ladder to the inner chain link fence and cut a hole through. Then, they propped the ladder against the outer wall. Williams went up first. Every creak of the ladder echoed in his ears. He expected to hear shouts from the guards, the barking of dogs, a siren, but there was only silence. At the top of the wall, the freezing January wind hit his face. It was the first breath of free air in years. Below was the concrete prison yard. Ahead were the dark fields and lights of distant houses. In that moment, they weren't prisoners. They were on top of the world. And in a span of minutes, all three men were balancing on top of Parkhurst's mighty wall, gazing out at freedom just on the other side. One by one, they rappelled down the outside using the cord, dropping onto the cold earth outside the prison's perimeter. It was around 6:30 p.m. and, unbelievably, they were out. The three fugitives found themselves standing together in the darkness outside the walls of Parkhurst Prison. They exchanged triumphant grins in the cold night air. It was almost hard to believe. They had just done the impossible. But they couldn't linger to celebrate. They vanished into the night, scurrying across the fields before the prison had any inkling of what had just happened. Getting out of the prison was only step one. Now, they faced the challenge of getting off the Isle of Wight without getting caught. The island is surrounded by water, and as soon as Parkhurst raised the alarm, all ferry ports and crossings would be under tight surveillance. Rose had anticipated this. His bold plan: find an airplane or boat to escape the island. Moving quickly away from the prison grounds, the trio shed any telltale prison garments and blended into civilian clothes. They had worn casual clothing under their work uniforms for this exact purpose. Incredibly, they even managed to call a taxi in the nearby town of Newport and ride to the town of Sandown on the island's opposite side. They had to use smuggled cash without arousing any suspicion. About 20 minutes later, around 7 p.m., the taxi dropped them near Sandown Airfield, a small local airport. They thanked the driver and paid with cash, nothing unusual to remember them by. Under the cover of darkness, they hopped the fence into the little airfield. Rose's plan was to steal a light aircraft and fly to the mainland, or even to France. They quickly found a couple of parked single-engine planes. Rose clambered into one of them and tried to get it started, hoping that his pilot knowledge would let him bypass the ignition. It was no use. The plane's battery had been removed. He hurried to another aircraft and tried again, hot wiring under the instrument panel. This time, the engine turned over, but wouldn't fully ignite. The ignition lock was too sophisticated to bypass without the keys. After several minutes of frustrating effort, Rose had to admit defeat. Stealing a plane was proving harder than expected, and time was slipping away. They decided not to waste any more time at the airfield and moved on. Plan B: escape by boat. The trio headed north on foot, making for the coastline. For 4 days, January 4th to January 7th, they crisscrossed the island by night and hid by day. But the initial euphoria of freedom quickly evaporated, replaced by the gnawing misery of cold, hunger, and paranoia. The unity that had fueled their escape began to fray under the relentless pressure. The arguments started as hushed disagreements in damp and derelict sheds, and escalated into bitter clashes of their core natures. Rose, the pragmatic ex-businessman, saw the grim reality with clarity. "We're not getting off this island on our own, Matt," he hissed one freezing night, his voice trembling from the chill. "Every boat is watched. I have a contact on the mainland, a man I trust. One call is all it takes for a pickup." For Rose, it was simple logistics, but for Williams, the paranoid mastermind, this was heresy. "A man you trust," he shot back, his intense eyes burning even in the gloom. "There's no such thing. One call and you've put a leash back on all of us. No outsiders. We stick to my plan." Rodger, a powerhouse reduced to shivering in the dark, paced like a caged animal, his frustration boiling over. "Then what's the plan now, eh?" he growled, kicking at a loose floorboard. "Freezing to death? I didn't break out of Parkhurst to die in a ditch." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The very alliance that had broken them out of prison was now threatening to break them apart. Yet, somehow, they held together. Despite their internal friction, they managed one moment of incredible audacity. In a cheeky act of defiance, they snuck into a takeaway shop in the town of Ryde to buy fish and chips, just yards from a police station without being recognized. For a few brief minutes, they were just three normal guys eating a hot meal. Back at the prison, it took staff until about 8 p.m. to realize the trio was missing, over 2 hours after they'd escaped, when a patrol finally found the cut fence. By then, the fugitives were far away. And if they'd realized they had such a head start, they might have caught a ferry and vanished entirely. Meanwhile, the entire island was crawling with police. hundreds of officers with helicopters, dogs, and roadblocks, turning the Isle of Wight into a giant open-air prison as they hunted the fugitives. One officer later described the lockdown island as a mini Alcatraz. The convicts had escaped the prison, but now they were stuck on the island with nowhere to run. The escape dominated the news headlines, and nervous residents were warned to lock their doors and stay vigilant until the men were caught. Ferry ports were barricaded, and every outgoing boat or vehicle was inspected. Yet, through a combination of cunning and luck, Williams, Rose, and Rodger managed to evade capture for several days. They kept a low profile and moved carefully. Police came close a few times. Once, they even triggered a burglar alarm in a house that they thought the fugitives might be hiding in. They weren't. But each day the trio survived gave them a false confidence that they might actually get away with it. By the fifth day, however, they were no closer to escaping the island. They hadn't managed to steal a boat, every vessel they found was either secured or too risky to take, and they knew they couldn't keep hiding forever. January 7th, 1995 dawned with them still stuck on the Isle of Wight. They decided to make a break for it that evening, hoping that after 4 nights the authorities might have relaxed slightly. Perhaps they thought the police assumed they'd left the island or were long gone. In truth, the police were still on full alert. That evening, the three decided to head toward the ferry port at Fishbourne, where car ferries go to Portsmouth on the mainland. Maybe they reasoned they could stow away on a departing ferry truck or slip through somehow. To improve their odds, they chose not to walk on as a group. Rose and Rodger walked together a short distance ahead, while Williams trailed behind on the same road. Around 7:20 p.m., as they walked along a country road under the dim winter light, luck finally turned against them. An off-duty prison officer happened to be driving by. He couldn't believe his eyes. Up ahead, he saw 2 rugged-looking men, unaccompanied, and he thought he recognized them. Then, he spotted a third man a little behind, and realization struck. These were the escaped convicts. The officer immediately alerted the authorities. Within minutes, sirens were wailing and police vehicles converged on the area of Fishbourne and Wootton. The trap sprang shut swiftly. A police car cut off Rose and Rodger on the road, and armed officers swarmed them. Both men, utterly exhausted, surrendered immediately. Rose even dropped to his knees, reportedly pleading, "Don't shoot." After 5 days on the run, they were caught without a fight. Williams, trailing behind, saw this and immediately bolted into nearby woods. Police units, dogs, and a helicopter with a thermal camera rushed after him. Williams ran for his life, darting through trees and hedgerows. He made it to a marina by the Medina River and tried to find a boat, but the police helicopter's spotlight soon swept over the docks, illuminating the area and leaving him almost no places to hide. In desperation, Williams jumped into the freezing river water up to his neck, hoping the cold would mask his body heat from the helicopter. But police dogs soon sniffed him out. Williams, half frozen, stumbled out of the water and was quickly taken down by officers on the muddy riverbank. He was too cold and weak to resist. He was so cold that paramedics had to wrap him in blankets before hauling him off. One officer later said that Williams looked like a hunted animal, and that he had finally given up. After roughly 90 hours of freedom, the last of the Parkhurst escapees were captured. By that night, all 3 were securely back in custody, shivering and exhausted, but alive. The manhunt was finally over. All 3 men earned an extra 2-year sentence for the escape, a drop in the bucket compared to their life terms, barely a blip for men already destined to spend their entire lives in prison. The breakout caused a nationwide scandal and an official inquiry. It was the second high-profile breakout from a top-security British prison within 6 months. Another had occurred at Whitemoor in 1994, so public outrage was enormous. The report blasted Parkhurst's lax security as a chapter of errors. The prisoners had exploited basic failures. Poor head counts, no alarms on fences, blind spots in CCTV, and astonishing staff complacency. One inmate had been left alone to build a ladder The prison's governor was removed and urgent security upgrades were made. New alarms, better cameras, stricter tool control. Parkhurst even lost its Category A status as a result of this fiasco. In the end, the escapees gained nothing lasting, just a brief taste of freedom. Back at Parkhurst, the three were placed under much stricter watch. Williams, the mastermind, spent years in solitary confinement to ensure he never got another chance. None of them ever came close to escaping again. It remains one of the most daring prison breaks in Britain's history. If you enjoyed this prison break case, check out the channel. There you'll find many great stories just like this one. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I'd be very grateful, and I'll catch you next time.